right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys. All right, so again, my name is Colin Eddy. I'm the events assistant with conveners.org. I'm joined today by my colleague, Rena, who is going to be helping out. And then, of course, we have our guest speaker today, Brett. So again, to get things started, just want to quickly go over the agenda, what we're going to be talking about. And if anybody has any questions or anything for me, certainly feel free. You can use the chat or just raise your hand. So today we're going to be talking about effective techniques to capture community voice in developing collective strategy. We have Brenton with Forward Cities here today, so I'm very excited to introduce him and pass it over to him in just a moment once we get through the intros here. This is a part of our conveners.org team. We do work with a lot of different consultants, myself included, so this certainly isn't everybody, but this is the core group of us. So again, I'm joined by Rena today, Sarah Sterling, who many of you I'm sure are familiar with. She's actually enjoying some well-deserved rest this week, so she'll be back next week. And then we have Sarah Joy, Ray, Stephanie, Avery, and Missy. We are a virtual team. We're located all over the world. I'm located in St. John's, Newfoundland in Canada. Rena is also in Canada. Sarah Sterling is in Guatemala City. And then I believe everyone else on this slide is kind of distributed in various places across the United States. And just a little bit about conveners.org in case any of you are not totally familiar with us and with what we do. We do work on various different levels. So we are a global membership community of purpose-first, impact-focused conveners. What we mean when we say conveners is any organization or individual that's committed to bringing people together to create catalytic social or environmental impact. So that could be anything from impact accelerators, event organizers, to professional coaching and leadership services, you name it, as long as you're someone who's passionate about bringing people together in a common space to create impact, then this is a good community for you. We do have a wide range of membership services and benefits that we do offer. Most of them kind of focused around how to create engaging, trust-building, community-focused environments, both virtually and in person, more and more virtually these days. And if you do want any information on that or you have any questions, please feel free to connect with me. I may not be able to answer your questions, but I can certainly connect you with Sarah Sterling, who can provide you with a bit more information on that if you need it. So again, our Spark today is Brenton, Senior Director of Learning Networks with Forward Cities, who are a nonprofit equipping communities to grow and sustain more equitable entrepreneurial ecosystems. I did have the pleasure of joining Brett's session during our Accelerating the Accelerators event in August. So I'm personally very much looking forward to passing it over to him and hearing what it is that he has to say in just a few minutes here. These are just a few of our upcoming events. So we have on September 23rd, we have our ATA Masterclass series, where we'll be discussing attributes of successful startups. That'll be led by Ian Fisk with Mentor Capital Network. And then we do also have our two-part hybrid events training series. I do have to apologize, the dates on this slide for the training series are not correct. Sarah created these slides before she left and then the dates changed and I did not have access to edit them. So the dates for those are actually, it's now September 30th, and then the following Thursday is the part 2, October 7th, both of those happening at 12 p.m. Pacific time. All of our events and the most up-to-date information with the correct dates for those are on our website at conveners.org, so you can certainly feel free to have a look on there. You'll see a bit more information about what these events are, what we're going to be discussing, and then you can have a look through any other events that might be of interest to you. So just a quick breakdown of our time today. We do have welcome and intros right now. Then I'm just going to move us into a quick community connection activity. We're going to break everybody off into breakout rooms, groups of 2 or 3, just to kind of get the conversation started, get to know the people who are in the session with you. And then I'll pass it over to Brett, who'll kind of lead us through the rest of the call. If time allows at the end, then we'll have some time for any questions that anybody might have for Brett. For those of you who haven't joined our member calls in the past, we do see all of our guest speakers as sparks. The purpose of that title is because the goal is for them to spark conversation. So we do like for these calls to be as interactive as possible. You can use the chat, you can raise your hand if you wanted to speak. We would love to see everybody participating as much as possible. So the topic for the community connection today is going to be focused all around your accomplishments. So we'd like for you to reflect on what you've been able to accomplish in life so far, talk about who are some of the people that you'd like to thank and to spotlight for helping you to get to where you are today, and whose shoulders do you stand on. So I will broadcast that into the chat when you get into the breakout rooms. Don't worry about having to remember that. So we will go ahead and open the breakout rooms there now, and you have 10 minutes, and then we will see you all back here for the rest of the session. All right, just waiting for the last couple to rejoin here now. Some good discussions going on in room 2, I take it. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hope everybody enjoyed your chance to get to know one another, and I will hand it over to Brett now for the rest of the call.
We come back muted. I always forget that. Thank you, Colin. So that was fun. I didn't see it coming, but it was a great little conversation to kind of kick things off. Let me get my screen going. In the meantime, I am Brett Brenton, Senior Director of Learning Networks for an organization called Forward Cities. We are a national nonprofit in the States that is, we see a racial wealth gap in America, and we feel like a good vehicle to try to close it is entrepreneurship. So we take an equity lens to everything we do in building what we call entrepreneurial ecosystems, which I think is becoming a more popular term. And as a result, you know, groups like conveners are essential to us developing a craft and a practice that we can share on the ground. So grateful to Colin and conveners for hosting and allowing us a chance to have this important conversation. So, you know, effective techniques to capture community voice and developing collective strategy. Essentially, that's just making sure that you're listening to people and letting them have a strong say at the table, which doesn't happen often enough in any of the lines of work that we do. There's serious room for improvement. And so it felt like a good deep dive opportunity for us to have a collective conversation. I'll make this session very interactive. I'm going to put you right back in a breakout in just a minute. And I invite you to ask questions throughout as we go through. I'll pause kind of at each. I'm going to introduce some of the tools we use in the processes, but ultimately, if there's something that just sparks something in your mind and leads to kind of a follow-up or a deeper inquiry, then we'll be sure to create space for that. To start, just for my good, if you could just pop in and briefly mention who you are, what organization you're with, and where you're joining us from, what part of the world you're joining us from, that would be great. And I'll get the chat open just so I can see folks as they come in. You know, I know this is one of the strongest groups that I'm a part of. There's a lot of different kind of tables, so to say, or membership groups, but you know, this is one of the strongest ones, mostly because I think there's an international audience that Conveners has been able to tap that a lot of organizations have a hard time doing. That means that they've equated the sharing and the knowledge in a way that makes it accessible to so many populations. So, and here you go, some good testimony. We've got Brooklyn and Berkeley, Vegas, nice, Salt Lake, New York, another Brooklyn, Toronto, great. Grew up in Buffalo, not far away. So thanks to all of you for putting that in and giving me a little bit of understanding of where you're coming from. So as I said, we're going to go right back into breakouts here. And I'm just going to preload them. Looks like, yep, we've got perfect size for these groups. And we will go in there really thinking about a couple key questions, because, you know, we all have to connect with community in some ways or others. Some of us are actively looking to pull information from them, maybe in a somewhat extractive manner, but probably more in an inclusive manner. And then the question is like, you know, well, what does that look like? What methodology do we need to use? What's the end goal of our desire to activate community voice? Why is it important to your work? And then the other question that I'd just like you to think about is, you know, if you feel like aspirationally as an organization, you're just not quite there, there's still room for growth. Who or what stands in your way of fully activating that voice? I don't think any of us have nailed this as a practice yet. So there's more that we can do. So I want to use that as a chance to kind of spark conversation. And I'm gonna, just given on our time, we're a little bit further into it. So I'm gonna give us about 8 minutes to do that. If I can adjust, yeah. And then we'll come back and we'll unpack. The one thing, the other thing that I would add is just choose a representative. So somebody, when you get back, can share out some broad level understandings of what was discussed. And I will hop around as we go. So with that, actually, it looks like Colin and maybe Rena, you guys, I can't see you in a breakout room. So if you can just join, or I'll see how that works, but it would be good to have you in there as well. All right, we'll see you in about 8 minutes. Uh-oh. Well, I think it should be closing any minute now.
Oh, gotcha.
And Colin, you were making such a good point when it stopped.
We're all back.
Oh, we're all back. Okay.
We're all back. There we go. It's still hard to see like everything, even with a double monitor, what you're presenting. And so, well, welcome back. So hopefully you had a chance to pick somebody to, you know, share what was some of the highlights of what came out of those two questions. But, you know, if not, then kind of default into it now. And I'd just love to hear, you know, how did you address those two questions? In fact, what I'll do is just show them real quick again. Why is activating community voice important in your work, and or what stands in the way of fully activating that voice?
I can go first and speak for our group. So when we're talking about like the importance of activating community voice and why that's important to our work, it is one, it's built into our organizations. It's also key in really understanding the complexities within communities and being able to have those open and honest conversations to truly understand what is happening in order to either respond or to better just understand the community. And then I'm trying to think of Colin. Oh, Colin was talking about conveners. So obviously this organization is designed to bring community together. So those were some of the key points about that and what gets in our way. We talked about one example that was really good of trying to bring people in and trying to engage with workers and having senior level staff not be responsive to that. And so not answering to the promise of actually being able to respond when you do ask for community voice, and then nobody's there to listen, and that can be devastating and have long-term consequences. Some of the other obstacles is just trying to synthesize a lot of different voices into the work. And so being able to go out into community, listen to a bunch of different perspectives and bringing that into whatever you're designing, whether that be an event. Some of those voices are not going to be incorporated into that for a number of reasons, and being able to justify that and knowing how to manage all of those requests. The other challenge that we discussed was that as community voice engagement grows, a lot of people feel their voice wants to grow with that. And how do you kind of manage people being more engaged than others, but still trying to bring everybody along? And Colin, Marty, if I missed anything, feel free. You all had a bunch of good points. So
Oh, I think that was good.
It was a solid 8 minutes. Thank you. Appreciate it, Jacqueline. Others? I snuck in and heard Hillary mention something that I really liked, and I'm going to call it out. That, you know, we don't really question it. Like, of course we should be thinking about these things, but we don't really question it. We just kind of assume that that's happening. And I think for me, that means, intentionality has to be a huge part of this. It has to be fully baked into everything you're doing. If what you really care about is that you're representing the stakeholders that you say you want to serve. So, it does get taken for granted. It's maybe assume that we're already doing that. So of course we're doing that. We're a social impact organization, but, it has to constantly be revisited, I feel like, in order to fully cultivate that. Any last thoughts before we move on? Okay. And we'll have a chance to revisit too. So now I want to just shift gears towards sharing how we do this work. It is essential, to the point I was just making. We cannot be successful at our work unless we are fully activating community voice. We take a human-centered approach. I won't say we're a human-centered design organization because we haven't been fully trained up on it, outside of just things that we've learned individually within the organization. But as an organization, I wouldn't put that stamp on us. I think that's a good bar to say that you're working hard to achieve. And I know a lot of people are familiar with human-centered design, but it's important to highlight this, especially for this conversation. So the way Forward Cities looks at it is, the human-centered approach to us. If we really want to address the issues in community, then we have to first agree that they're solvable. We have to say that there is a solution out there that can be reached, that is realistic, tangible, achievable. And then from there, we have to say, all right, if there is something that's affecting a group of a constituency within a community, and that's what we want to solve for, then they need to be at the table to design the solutions. In many cases, I'll talk about data in a minute. There's an extractive measure that comes from that. Like, we want to understand what your problems are. We're going to survey the heck out of you, and then we'll either, let's say a best case scenario, we'll activate that when we make the plan for what to do to fix your problem. And that's a very 20th century approach. And I feel like in the last couple of decades, especially in the last couple of years, people are starting to understand that if you're ultimately going to first understand the problem, then develop solutions that can overcome it, then the people who are being affected by the problem need to be at the table. So, that's front and center to everything we do. Does anyone here, would they consider themselves human-centered approach practitioners within their organization? Feel free to come off mute if you want to share how you do that.
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in here. I think it's a question. I think our answer is we're getting there. We're Equine Green is like a global social innovation fund, so we identify and invest in social entrepreneurs around the world. I think like our programming team folks have started to think about redesigning how we support individuals who are tackling really complex social justice challenges, especially at a time where we're talking about racial justice in a way that much more openly and more visibly over the last year, in ways that I think corporate America and other folks have not been able to tackle those things before. And so the ways that we support, particularly folks who are doing work on the ground that are tackling like really challenging things, racism and oppression and white supremacy and all the things, has called for us to take on a more human-centered approach in how we design, how we create space, how we support our fellows, how we lift up their voices. So it's something that we've been a little bit more intentional, both from a communications, but also from a program design POV.
Thanks, Adrian. Anyone else want to share?
I just will add that a group that I facilitate for that is social justice focused, it's maybe 30 or 40 paid staff, decided to do salary transparency, which I think is, I think it's great, and it's one of those things that it's like the science is behind it and it's supposed to be a good idea and everything. But I think Americans are so uptight of money that I think it's a very fraught conversation. And then while they were doing that, the entire staff read a couple of books about social justice and, white privilege. And, I was saying, it's great that you guys are doing that, but you're going really fast, and I think that may cause some, disruption emotionally, just because you're inviting people to have some of these conversations, and there's sort of a lot of things at play. And I also think the executives may not be ready for, if we're going to tell people that they can really, talk about this stuff, that may be more disruptive than you're planning. But so mostly I was just saying, why don't you, do one and then wait and then do the other. And it has been playing out pretty disruptively. I mean, I think in the end it will be good, but it has been a very bumpy ride.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point. There's like this patient disruption, which disruption is a good thing, right? But it can be damaging, to your point, and a level of patience needs to be taken when you're going to do something that's going to alter the path or the philosophy or the directionality of an organization. So it's a salient point. Okay, well, let's take a look at just how we try to collect the right kind of voice, and we do it in a number of ways. Our work is heavily data supported. So again, this is entrepreneurial ecosystem work. So when you think of any particular city or region, there is an ecosystem, whether people recognize it or not, that's supporting small business. It's entrepreneurial support organizations, it's city and municipal leaders, it's philanthropy in some cases, it can be corporate in some cases. But all these folks are working to try to provide the right kind of supports for small businesses to be successful. And so we have something called the E3 scorecard, which we roll out. Cities can self-assess how they're doing. And this comes down right to direct entrepreneurs who are facing a lot of the challenges that make some of these ecosystems deficient in certain areas. We want to hear directly from those support organizations. So we do a lot of surveying on that front, as well as from entrepreneurs themselves. And then one of the things that I'll talk about in a minute, we convene a council in any kind of significant engagement we do that is made up of entrepreneurs of color who are facing the obstacles, which to the power elite might not be so obvious. They might think that there's great flow and connectivity to resources, but they're not hearing properly from folks on the ground. And when I've worked in about 24 communities using this methodology, when I see these folks sit at the table, it is, patient disruption. Let's go back to that. It is disruptive. And it is something that you can see the looks on people's faces. They are learning as they go about how much the challenges these folks are bringing up are real. So we find that to be a great way to bring people together at a table like that. And then we run programs that I'll talk about in a minute, and we always evaluate those. We're a nonprofit, so we live heavily off of philanthropic grants. There's a lot of restricted funding that comes, and we have to report on that, but we want to know, are we having impact on the programs that we beta test? So the general approach, when you think of an ecosystem, we've designed what we call these interstitials around embedding an ecosystem builder, building that council that I talked about. You'll see the assessment and metrics piece to capture data. But then in the middle there's this three-step process where we go from making sense of what we know, hearing from entrepreneurs that are facing these challenges directly, engaging them in the design process, which I talked about a little bit earlier. How do we develop programs that we know are not only informed by some meta quantitative data, but also the qualitative stories that people bring to the table, so that we can think about taking a whole kind of ecosystem approach, and the solutions that we design will have massive benefit across the board in a particular region. And obviously no two regions are the same. They all bring their own unique sets of challenges to it. Then we roll out. This engagement process is heavy on the programs. Again, if we want to start a co-working space in a part of town that's has not had the luxury, people are miles away from the closest co-working spaces, then we want it to be led by people from that community. We want to fund them at a level that gives them a chance to really test some ideas for how to engage their fellow community members and give them the confidence and the comfort of being in a space that feels like their own. And then on the back end, we really do a lot of awareness storytelling, which again is highlighting that community voice from people who have either taken part in our programs or witnessed them, had something to do with maybe building them. And then we look to sustain these efforts, which kind of leaves the community voice piece, but make sure that whatever was built along that time is learned from and sustained over time. In terms of like delivering the programs, I think this is a great way that I've found to get community voice. So quick show of hands, anyone familiar with strategic doing? Okay. So, it was a book that turned into a program, and, we're not affiliated with them, but I've gone through the training and I've embedded it into every engagement that I use now. It's a fantastic way to really bring community voices to a table and then give them a very purposed process in terms of how we're going to cultivate the right kind of ideas. And Jacqueline pointed out, what I heard when she was talking about this a little bit was like, it's hard to reach consensus. The more people that are involved, the more energy that's put behind this, how are you going to make sure that you get to something that everybody's going to agree on? So it's kind of like a narrowing of a funnel, the strategic doing process. This is like rule 5 of 10. You're right in the middle of it here, but it's my favorite one, the big easy. But how can you test some things? How can you first off come up with new good ideas, activating assets, linking and leveraging them? And then how can you test maybe 1, 2, or 3 of those ideas in a beta form at low cost with relatively few inputs that could lead to significant impact? And the reason I bring it up here is because when, again, you have people who are facing the challenges, they first off, they bring unique assets that the typical kind of treetop folks in community don't consider when they're designing, solutions to a lot of the problems that they're trying to overcome. And it just creates much more robust set of opportunities that we can work from. So we didn't do this we've been doing this work since 2018 in this form. We didn't do it in 2018, 2019. We started sprinkling it in 2020, and now it's completely embedded in our work. I won't, like I said, I won't do a community engagement without it. And what it does then is it creates an opportunity to take something like, you might have seen the community canvas, where we turn that into a pilot project canvas, and make sure that, as we think about who we're trying to affect, as we think about the outcomes we want them to reach, what assets need to be activated, you're not coming at that asking the same treetop folks to design something like this, but you're using what was informed through that strategic doing process to ensure that those voices maintain. The tables that build these canvases, again, are represented by people in community who are actually affected by the challenges. So there's no savior complex here. It's really the people overcoming challenges they currently face, which makes it much more engaging. It makes it much more sustainable in the long run. And then we turn these into pilots and we test them. Like I said, they're pretty low funded. I'd say the average one is about $5,000 to $10,000 in community, and they run for a couple months, and we test to see if this is something that'll hold. So, I'll pause there before we go on. I gave you 3 tools that we use, and I'm curious to hear, if you look at a process for community engagement like we do on the ecosystem level, if you try to narrow down and make sure that you're engaging community in a way that ensures that their voice and their ideas are part of what gets activated, or if you use something similar to a community canvas to do any of this work, again, with that same goal of getting the right voices to be part of the solution, I'd be curious to know, how that looks in your particular vein of work. So I'll stop talking. I know we only have 10 minutes left, but I want to turn it over to you to start to talk about some of these, and as well as the other ways that you practice making sure you engage community voice in your work. And I guess a good positioning is like, does any of this resonate with the work you do, or do you have different methodologies of trying to make sure that you're hearing from people and letting it inform the direction of your organization or the coalitions that you work in?
I can kick us off. I think what resonates with me the most about this is how this work is like so iterative and emergent rather than like top down and like linear. And I think the conventional model is like, hey, here's our plan. This is the strategy. There's no community involvement or feedback loops into how they identify the problem, how they see the challenges. And what strikes me with this approach is just like there are so many opportunities for conversations and points to adjust based off community feedback that I think is so important.
Thanks, Hillary. Just seeing your question too, is Canvas available for use? Yeah, I can share this out. It's our IP, but we try to be pretty open source when we can. So I think I'll share out this whole deck, make sure that Colin and company get it out to everybody. How about others? Now, do any of these tools kind of resonate, or do they feel similar to the approach that you're taking? Because again, I want to learn. One of the things Rena and I were talking about is I love that people come to this work, in so many different verticals, or with different goals in mind organizationally. We care about BIPOC entrepreneurs and helping cities find better ways, scale better ways to serve them. But y'all come at this in very different ways. So I'm curious about, what does it look like when you try to implement tools to ensure that a human-centered approach or that community voice is present? Yeah, Marty just made a great comment in the chat. It's interesting. I used to be on the road every 3 weeks, few days at a time. I'd have 4 or 5 cities at a time, in my group, and I haven't been to those cities in 18 months. So now, like, this is our methodology for trying to solve community problems, and that's tricky. That can become very problematic in terms of, first off, accessibility. Not everybody that we're trying to serve's got a Zoom laptop ready to engage, so that's a big problem. Whereas sitting at a table at a community center or a public library was a much easier way to do it. But also just fatigue. I think we're all tired of this in so many ways. And for a group like this, we're always going to have to meet this way. But when you're trying to solve local problems, the more you can get together, the more you can look somebody in the eye and have that conversation with them, the more that's going to come out of it. It's going to lead to a constructive solution. Other thoughts? How about this? Because we're getting towards the end. Like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your organization in terms of its ability to activate community voice and make sure that it was an embedded part of your organizational practice? And just, you can put that in the chat. It's a safe space, I promise.
I think, currently our organization is really focused on like the listening component. And I think that's what the muscle we have to really build is really how do we listen and make sure that that voice is activated, because there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of meetings, but a lot of times we get back to the desk and into the planning and like, how does that continue? And so, I think having just seen this canvas, I could see how like components of that could be helpful in incorporating that more into our work and having it be more of a process versus us trying to just infuse it in a way that makes sense for us.
Thanks, Jacqueline. I have yet to see a 10 on this, by the way, or even probably a 9. I'd probably rate us a 7. We still have a lot of room that we can grow in this area. And part of it is, remember, we're trying to overcome a power structure that has dictated the methodology for problem solving for at least the last, we'll say, 80 years, post-war. So that's a really hard thing to do. Like, people have their mind set up, whether they're municipal leaders, philanthropic leaders, corporate leaders, about what works. And you know, when that's kind of the status quo, again, back to that patient disruption, we need to be able to take our time and slowly inform people at the pace that they're ready to learn and accept new methodologies about how this works. That being said, you know, I had never heard of this before I came to Ford Cities a few years ago, and I've seen it work so many times now. I've seen it just transform people in those power chairs in terms of the way that they see it. And I just came off an SSIR, what, you know, kind of shift in philanthropy webinar that really spoke to how the pandemic has caused a pivot in the way that they look at ceding power and control over decision making on the way their funds get distributed. So I do feel like it's sea change, and sea change is slow, but that it's happening, and that's encouraging.
Brett, I may have missed this, but what do the numbers on this pilot canvas mean?
Yeah, so it's just kind of a sequential step. Let me come back to present real quick. Make sure I'm referring to, so on the canvas here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just the sequential steps. The community canvas is laid out a similar way. It's the business canvas. If you've ever seen like a small business try to like chart out how they're, so it's really built off of that. The communitycanvas.org, I believe it is. There might be a hyphen between community and canvas. They made one for any community use for any reason, and we built ours off of that, specific to the type of work that we do. But if you look at it, this could really apply to anybody who's doing community work. So it's just the sequence that you're going to follow.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll turn it back over.
One question.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Julia. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I guess I do have one question maybe that you can talk to surrounding the philanthropy issue, or like with funders, like how to bring funders along in this process as well, or like really get that buy-in where your funder might have a different approach or a different goal in mind to what your community is asking for, and like when that tension kind of arises, and how to still in those moments like put your community first.
Yeah, two words come to mind. First is trust, and the second is evidence. So you have to build trust and relationships with folks who hold those positions, which sometimes can be hard to do depending on the size and scope of your organization. But then you need to provide evidence, and you need to let them kind of live through the evolution of evidence as it emerges about how this works. I'll raise Pittsburgh. So we did work in Pittsburgh, just wrapped last month. We were there for 2.5 years, and we had fantastic funders, but it took a long time to get them to a point where they were going to kind of freely allow us to progress the way we felt we needed to. We hit a lot of pushback at the ESO level, these support organizations who were very used to doing things their way, who all received grants from these funders, but perceived us as an outsider coming in and disrupting the apple cart. And we had to get around that in year one and really live with some of that before we could ever have success. It took until this last 6 months to really see everything start to flower. And along the way, because we built trust with the funders early on, they were patient. And as they saw the evidence emerge, they knew that, they would continue to support us, continue to fund us, and get to the finish line of this. So that feels like a pretty good example for that. Okay, I know we're over time. So Colin, I'll turn it back to you to send us home.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks so much, Brett. Thank you for your time and for your expertise. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. We will be in touch early next week with a recap email, but if anybody has any questions or needs anything in the meantime, you can feel free to reach out.
And just put my email up. You'll get stuff from Colin, but if you want to reach out directly to me, please feel free to do so. Thank you, everyone.